Hello. Today's lecture is about the inner workings of a music publishing house. Or another way to say it is the organization of responsibilities by department. Um, this would really apply to your bigger publishing companies, your majors, Universal, Sony ATV, Warner Chappell, as well as some of the, I don't know, let's call them mini majors like BMG or Cobalt, these larger international organizations that aren't necessarily connected to a record company. They're not the sister publishing houses of the major record labels. And also there's a lot of large independent music publishers that also will have these departments. And in some cases, some of them won't have all the departments and they'll outsource certain responsibilities. And we'll discuss that as we go through the list. So first off, I want to talk about the Business and Legal Affairs Department. It's pretty self-explanatory. It is the attorneys, paralegals. When I was at Universal, when we had over 1 million copyrights, we had like a senior vice president who was the lead attorney, and we had at any given time 1 or 2 junior attorneys under him. Actually, I take that back, we had a third attorney, and her responsibility was all about catalog acquisition. So she was doing something completely different. She was looking at big catalogs that were available to acquire, which is another subset of acquisition, which we'll talk about when we talk about acquisitions for music publishers. Also, there was always usually, even at the smaller companies, when we only had 1 attorney, we would always have a paralegal on staff, and usually our paralegals would track options. They'll track the writer's options so that we would know when it was time to pick up a writer's option, or if their deal was ending and if we needed to go in early and renegotiate or discuss whether we were going to drop a writer or not. So let me talk about what the duties are of that department. Number 1, to negotiate, draft, and approve all contractual agreements. And they could be agreements with writers that the publisher is signing, or it could be agreements to represent other smaller publishers' catalogs, maybe to administer those catalogs or to sub-publish those catalogs in foreign territories. And then also, like I mentioned, catalog acquisition. Number 2, advise other departments, because other departments will have legal issues coming up. In particular, copyright, and sometimes royalties. Royalties will need to know when certain royalties are due to the writer, and so the language can sometimes be complicated, and the legal department or the business affairs will have to translate to the royalties department of when the money is to be paid out. Also, sometimes writers like to get their money early, so they might be on there's certain payment periods, and if they're in the black, as we like to call it, you know, they don't owe us any money as a publisher. They're not indebted to us anyway. They have earned their advances back and are making money for the company. Sometimes the publisher will pay out the royalties early to keep a writer happy. It just depends, and it goes situation by situation, and there could be language in the contract that talks about that. As I mentioned before, number 3 is to track the options. This is a really important job. Every company I've ever worked at, we've missed options because the language is complicated, and there's different requirements for every deal of what is needed to pick up an option. Everybody has different requirements in their contracts because it's negotiated. So it's not set. It's not a set amount of songs you have to turn in, or a set amount of record and release songs that are recorded and released. Some deals are now called recoupment-based deals, which means that you are stuck in your initial period or your option until you recoup. So there's all different ways to negotiate the way that you move forward in your deal. And so every deal is different. So tracking options can be very complicated. It can be a very big job. And when you have hundreds of writers and you have one person tracking those options, it can be really overwhelming. I mean, when I was at Universal, the option tracking report we used to get monthly was like that thick, double-sided. So, oh, and on legal size paper. Legal size paper. Let's see, what's next? Number 4, stay current on all legal aspects, new legislation, and new technology. So on top of all the daily work that anybody in the legal department will have, is they have to be very well versed in whatever new legislation comes up and new rules. For instance, starting January 1st, 2021, I believe is the day it goes into effect, is the Music Modernization Act. And I went to a panel at South by Southwest with a legal panel in continued legal education with a panel full of very well-respected attorneys. And there were a lot of questions they couldn't answer. They didn't really understand the law yet. It wasn't totally fleshed out. So it's really important that attorneys are constantly learning and studying as laws move forward and they change. Okay, let's see. Number 5, sometimes they oversee licensing, particularly synchronization licensing, because synchronization licensing is the issuing of contracts for every use that happens. There's a contract or a license that gets generated, unlike a mechanical license for like a stream or a physical CD or vinyl. That's a license that's pretty standard. It's one page. If you go through the Harry Fox Agency, they're automatically generated. So sync licensing is a license that's highly negotiated. So every synchronization license is different. And there's a process, there's a clearance process, and then there's a licensing process. So sometimes the legal department will participate in the drafting of those licenses, or they'll oversee it. And if there's new technologies to add to their boilerplate contracts, they have to do that. They'll have to revise those contracts as new technologies come about. So streaming on demand, and that's the way most of us watch TV now, or YouTube TV or cable TV. And so it has to be very specific in the license of how the show is being transmitted to the user. Number 6 is infringements. And so when a song is infringed upon and there's some sort of claim made or some lawsuit filed, the songwriter would be best suited to hire their own attorney for that, a litigator. You would need a litigator for that, most likely. And then they would work in concert with the legal staff at your publishing house, because as I mentioned, I believe I've mentioned before that they work together on that kind of stuff. And when you're dealing with big companies, sometimes you could be suing somebody at your own company. So that's a situation where you want to settle. And so, but you want to be, as a songwriter, you want to be well represented and make sure that your best interests are being handled. And hopefully your publisher's doing that for you, but there are circumstances where they have to remain neutral. So number 7 is oversee audits with royalties. If the guys in suits come in, usually the legal department will deal with that with the royalties department. So it's a legal and it's a financial situation that's happening there. So everybody just wants to make sure everything is legal, because again, if a songwriter has the right to an audit, it's going to be written in their contract, and there's going to be parameters in the contract that say what can and cannot be done in an audit. Last but not least, okay, for business affairs is keeping track of writers' deals and renegotiating those deals. That's really important, because again, if you miss an option or you forget a deal is up, or you wait till the deal is up and that writer's doing really well, it's going to cost you a lot more money to keep them. And if you miss the option, they're free and clear to go somewhere else. So usually that doesn't happen with writers that you're really, really excited about, but it can happen. I've seen it happen. It's not good. Okay, next we're going to talk about the copyright department. Now, any music publisher, it doesn't matter if you're one person or you are, you know, you've got 1,000 people worldwide working for you. You're going to need somebody to do copyright. And copyright is pretty specific. They do a lot of things, and it's a very specific knowledge base. So I do know some publishers that will outsource that. They'll go and they'll find independent people who will handle registering copyrights and doing all the other things the copyright department does, which we'll go into now. Number one is they register songs with the PROs. And for those of you who have not had surveyed the music business or legal aspects, a PRO is a performing rights organization. So that's ASCAP and BMI, CSAC, and GMR in the US. And we'll get into the PROs and how they're different and how they're alike. But the thing about registering the songs with the PROs, if the songs aren't registered properly with the proper splits, then the writers and the publisher are not going to be paid properly on their performance income. And performance income is a huge chunk of a writer's income and of a publisher's income. So it's really important that that information is correct. And many, many times in the course of my work as a music supervisor, information is incorrect. I think probably on every single project I work on, I inform a publisher that their information is incorrect. And why is it incorrect? Because songs change hands. It's you know, intellectual property. It is the real estate of the music business, and you can sell it off. You can lose the rights, or you can buy it back. I mean, there's all kinds of things that can happen that make the rights and the copyright holders change hands. So it's really important to keep that information updated. Number two, they send out copyright notices for all print and mechanical uses. This is called a notice of intent with a mechanical use. And that's one of the things that's in the Music Modernization Act, where Spotify and the streaming services weren't able to keep up with the NOIs because there's just too many of them, you know, particularly when you're like, you know, it's one thing when new music's being added. It's another thing when all the music from the last, you know, maybe 100 years is being put up on Spotify. So keeping up with that, the manpower it takes to keep up with that, they couldn't do it. And so they're streamlining that process of NOIs for streaming. And a copyright notice is like, you know, when you go and you look at label copy on a, like if you bought a CD or you bought a vinyl record, or even if you click on the info section on, you know, Apple Music or Spotify and you want to see who owns the song, it'll say something like music by U2, lyrics by Bono, published by Polygram Music International, Universal Music PRS or ASCAP or something like that. And then it'll have, the little copyright symbol, and it'll say, 1995 or something like that. So that's what a copyright notice is. It's something we call label copy. That's also something that the copyright department does, is they supply label copy to the labels for releases. And then let's not forget, most importantly, filing copyright. Filing the registration of the copyright. Now, I just want to stress here, and I'll continue to stress it, you don't get paid any royalties from filing a copyright. Filing a copyright with the U.S. Copyright Office only gives you procedural rights, such as if there was a lawsuit and you won, you would get attorney fees paid back, and you would get statutory damages. So there's no money that's involved in that, other than the fee that you have to pay to copyright a song, which is actually very expensive. And now they've even limited to how many songs you can put on one copyright form. So the dirty little secret about publishers is that most publishers do not copyright songs until they know that the songs are going to be released to the public. So you could be a writer at Warner Chappell and be turning in, 20 songs a year. If only 2 of them are getting recorded, they're probably only going to copyright those 2 songs. Or they might go ahead and copyright the others while they're doing those 2 songs, but they're not going to bother copyrighting the songs until they get recorded and released. It's just too expensive, and there's just too much. It takes too much manpower to do it. Also, if there's older copyrights, songs that were written prior to January 1st, 1999, I believe. I could be wrong about that date, but just off the top of my head, some of those songs can be renewed. Anything written after the passage of the 1998 Copyright Extension Act, which is also known as the Sonny Bono Copyright Act, also known as the Mickey Mouse Copyright Act, which we can talk about that later, of why it has those names. Those songs are good for, the copyright's good for life of the last living author. So if there's multiple authors, plus 70 years. If it's a single author, it's life of that author plus 70 years. So if you wrote a song 100% and you died in 2030, or not you, but the proverbial you, that copyright wouldn't go into public domain until 70 years after 2030, which would be, I think 2100. Is that? I can't even think that far ahead. But so that's how the math works on that. And again, if there's multiple authors, it's the last author that dies, and then plus 70 years. So if one of those authors had an untimely death, and like there's a band and somebody died young, it wouldn't affect the life of the copyright. The other thing that the copyright department does is they have a copyright and royalty tracking system that they keep updated with the IT department. When I was at Polygram, we used PITS. And when I was at Universal, we used Counterpoint. I was just talking to my friend at Disney. They used Counterpoint for a while. Now they're building their own system. There's several of these systems out there. And basically what they are is they're just, you type in a song title, or you type in an author, a songwriter, and you can pull up their whole catalog. You can go look at the song title and see who owns the song other than you, who are the co-publishers. You can also see if you're going to lose the song, if you don't own the song in certain territories. There can be all kinds of information in there. What the shares are, the splits. There's really important information in there for for the copyright department to use, for the royalty department to use, and for the creative department to use when they're pitching songs. Or when somebody comes back to you and wants to use a song, whether it's film and TV or to use on a record. Because there could be ownership issues and maybe you don't own the song anymore. See, that happens a lot in my job as a music supervisor. I'll see that it says that a song is owned by Universal, and then I'll go and confirm the share with Universal, and they'll say, oh, we don't own that anymore. It's now owned by this person, or I don't know who owns it anymore, but we lost the rights to that song in the US on this date. However, we still own it in this territory, so I can license that percentage for you in that territory. So splits and territory, very, very important for copyright and for royalties. And it's the copyright department that takes the contracts and they put that information into the database. They keep the database updated, and the IT department makes sure the database is running, and then if it's going down at a time for, you know, for software updates and things like that when it's not needed. Okay, the next department I want to talk about is the international department or the foreign department. There's an asterisk next to this one because not every publishing house has this. So actually, way back when, in the Stone Age, when I went to go work at Alma Irving Music, which became Rondor Music, I was replacing the president's assistant because she was being promoted to start the international department for Rondor, because Rondor we did have offices in all the major territories, and we had lots of, you know, great sub-publishers all around the world. So she was the liaison for that. When I was at Universal, at Polygram, we didn't have that position. We all dealt with the international people because actually Polygram owned a lot of copyrights, but we had a very small, very communicative staff worldwide. So it wasn't as big of a deal. But when I got to Universal, they did hire somebody to do that. Then they let her go and they shut down that department, and then they started it again. So it's an interesting job. And what that department does is they notify the reps throughout the world of all new releases. So it could be a record release, it could be a use in a movie, a TV show, a commercial. They notify them of new signings. So writers that we signed in the US for worldwide deals, so that they know that we have these new writers, or maybe we signed writers for US and certain territories. That would happen sometimes. Also, if those writers were artists and if they had records coming out, we would also make sure that they were aware of the song splits and what the rights were that we had and what type of deal it was. Was it a co-publishing deal or was it an administrative deal? So territories controlled acquisition of catalogs. If we acquired catalogs that were pertinent to their territory, we would let them know about that as well. That's what that department did. And then the other thing that department would do, and when I say department, it was always really just one person and maybe an assistant. They would entertain and work visiting writers. So what that means is that if we had a writer going to the London office or we had a writer going to the Paris office, we would let them know, you know, several months in advance that we had this writer who wanted to come to their territory. And so they would start setting up collaborations for them with local writers, their local writers, and also writers that were signed to other publishing companies. They would make sure that if there were any shows in town that they were doing ticket buys for, they would buy enough tickets so they could take the writers. They made sure that the different people at the company in that office would take time in their schedule to entertain them, like take them out to dinner, introduce them to A&R people, you know, take them to lunch, make sure they had a place to write, make sure they had the right instruments and equipment that they needed to write, and make sure that their accommodations were set up, you know, whether they needed a hotel or an Airbnb or something like that. So that's the types of things that was reciprocal. The same thing when, if, you know, we had a writer from Australia coming into the US, like somebody in the creative department would be asked to be kind of a point person for setting up collaborations, and they would do that with the person who was running the international department. So we would do those kinds of things, just to make sure that, you know, they were taken care of, and that they were being paid attention to while they were traveling. But the person in the international foreign department would be the one who would they would be the liaison, and they would be the one to direct the traffic on all of you know, these moving parts for traveling writers. Okay, next let's talk about the royalties department. Very important department, because they're the people who collect a writer's money and make sure it's paid out properly. Number one, the royalties department checks all royalty statements from music users. So that could be anything from the statements from the PROs. It could be checking a payment for a synchronization use against the contract to make sure the right amount of money came in for their share of the song. It could be for 100% song, or a pro rata share of a song, a prorated share, pro rata share. They would check and make sure that they would compare sales statements to mechanical uses. So if there was a song that was on a big selling record, they would make sure that the record company was paying out on the right number of units, the mechanical rate. And also, if the writer is an artist, there could be a certain amount of free goods. It gets even more complicated when the songwriter is an artist, because there's things that are written into their label deal that changes the rate. They could have a 3/4 rate. There could be a song cap. There's all kinds of things that could be in the label deal that would affect the mechanical rate and the money coming in. So the royalty department would need a copy of the label deal. They would need sales reports. They would need streaming reports. So they need all kinds of data to make sure that the money is being paid properly. It's a very difficult job, actually. Royalties is not for the faint at heart. Number two, crediting all monies to the proper songs and writers and any other income participants, because sometimes writers will, in their contract, give a part of their income to a third party who's not a writer. It could be a family member, it could be a manager, it could be somebody they owe a debt to. There's all kinds of weird things that can end up in contracts. Also, when you have multiple songs on a record by a bunch of multiple artists, multiple writers, and you have multiple writers from your company who have songs on that record, you have to make sure that the correct writer is getting credit for the correct song, and it's the correct share. So if somebody wrote 3% of a song, and hey, this happens in hip hop now all the time. I've seen, there was a Chance the Rapper song that I was clearing, and there were like 3 writers. One of them had 1%, one had 2%, and one had 3%. I mean, it's ridiculous. So when you have a situation like that, you have to make sure that the money is getting paid out properly to each person, because let's say you only own, as the publisher, 5%, but you have 3 writers splitting up that 5%. You know, and it can even be split into fractions. So you have, you know, writers that have 2.33% of a song. So that has to be computed and checked and computed and checked. Last but not least, the royalty department has to follow up with companies that have not paid in a timely manner or in a correct manner. So if people are late, like on sync payments, I deal with that all the time because I don't control the purse strings of my clients. and we may get an invoice and a contract from a licensor, and it's net 30 days. And, 2 months later, I get an email from the publisher and they're like, can you check on our payment? And it'll be 2 or 3 months overdue. And I submitted it, months ago. It happens all the time, actually. So I'm having to follow up with my client and make sure they get paid. So, and there's all kinds of wrangling that goes on with that. Maybe the payment did go through, maybe they sent it to the wrong place. Maybe we have I've many times actually had a canceled check, or I mean, like a cashed check, meaning that it got paid and they deposited it, but the licensor didn't actually notate that it was paid. So that happens a lot too, because you're dealing with just thousands and thousands of these licenses if you're a big company. And sometimes I'm dealing with massive amounts of licenses. And when I did Stepsisters, we licensed about 40 songs, but I think we figured out that there were something like 130 licensors, so different people that we had to get licenses from. It was maddening and confusing. Okay, so that's royalties. Very important. They're the people that, if you're a songwriter, they're the people who are going to pay you, so you got to be nice to them. You catch more, what is it? Catch more bees with honey than vinegar. Yeah, so you got to know who you got to be nice to. Okay, so next, the next department is called the promotions department, or sometimes it's called the catalog department, depending on where I've worked. Most places I've worked have had this person. It's usually one person. And depending on the company, they're either part of the creative department or they're part of the film and TV department. And what they do is they work with the back catalog. So they're not working with new songs that are coming in. They're not working with new product. They're working with what we call back catalog. So, like when I was at Polygram, like the Van Morrison catalog, that was back catalog. At the time, let's see, well, YouTube wouldn't have been back catalog. Thin Lizzy, we had Thin Lizzy. Thin Lizzy was back catalog. We had lots of standards. So anything that's not an active catalog, that maybe the artist isn't really making new records anymore, that would have been considered back catalog. So this department, what they do is they kind of repackage it. They find new ways to promote old catalog, whether that is redemoing songs, or we used to put out these CDs when I was at Polygram, where we would, they put them together for the film and TV department, but they would package different kinds of things, all these current artists doing these old songs, and there would be themes to them. And it was always really interesting. It was all super creative. We would go to people who were signed to us and ask them to do these interesting covers. And so then we had these new masters of songs that we owned. We owned the masters, we would pay for them. And then we could license them 100% for the sync use and for the master use. So things like that, the catalog department does things like that. They find new ways to repackage old catalog, whether that's, creating songbooks, new, packages. I mean, you still see them, like, see like CD packages, special packaging, like, like a Led Zeppelin box set, or jazz from, the 20s and 30s box set, stuff like that. That's what this department would do. And special projects, they'd work on special projects. I actually thought that it was the coolest job ever. You kind of have to have an encyclopedic knowledge of the catalog, but it's a really cool job. The guy that does it at Universal still to this day, he started in our duplication room. He was the guy who burned CDs for us to pitch. This kind of nerdy little English guy. And he is the catalog guy at Universal still to this day. And so it's a great gig. You can put your head down and no one bothers you. And, you know, it's a cool job. Okay. So let's talk about the creative department. I'm sure a lot of you are very interested in that. The creative department, their number one duty is to sign new writers, to, you know, keep the current roster, or the current, what do you want to call it, your stable of writers. You want to keep them current and hip and in tune to what's happening and connected to a lot of projects. So that is a constant in the creative department, always looking for new writers to sign, and preferably writers who have cuts already on records. And the best kind of writers to sign are the writers who are users of music. So a writer-producer or a writer-artist. The other thing that they do is to develop the writers through collaborations. So introducing their writers to other writers. It can be writers that are signed to you, or it can be writers that are signed to other publishers, because publishers work with each other pretty closely. You're competitors, but you're also colleagues. And so it's pretty different. They don't really do that so much in the record business, except, you know, when you're dealing with, you know, featured artists and things like that, which is a big thing now. But other publishers that work at other companies are kind of frenemies. You know, they're your competitors, but they're also, you have to have relationships with them. The other thing that the creative department does is they pitch songs. If, you know, it depends what type of music is. Pitching is becoming a dying art, but pitching songs for cover recordings, and introducing the writers to A&R people, to managers, to producers. I felt like I was doing my job when once I introduced a writer to an A&R person or a producer. If the A&R person went around me and went directly to my writer, that's actually what I wanted to happen. I just wanted to make sure that my writer was keeping me informed if an A&R person was calling them about something, about a co-write or about a song, because that's your job as a creative publisher, is to forge these relationships for your writers with the creative community and the people who make the decisions on record projects. So the other thing that they do in the creative department is A&R, and A&R is very different in publishing than it is at a label, because you're developing a writer. You're not necessarily developing them for an artist's career, although that does happen. If you sign an up-and-coming artist who doesn't have a record deal, you do go through those kind of motions where you're helping them pick the songs, you're setting up the collaborations, you're helping put together the recording sessions, and then you're going out and you're pitching them to a label to get them signed, if that's what you want to do, or you're helping them do some sort of self-release. So scouting is a big part of it. And whether that is, you know, surfing the web, you know, going on SoundCloud and YouTube and, you know, going on Spotify and, you know, all these different platforms online, whether you're going in the clubs and seeing artists live, which is really important. If it's a rock band, if it's a singer-songwriter, they need to have some sort of stage presence. They're going to need to tour. With hip hop, it's a little bit different. It's not as important, I think, the stage presence, although I would never sign an artist that couldn't pull it off live. That's just me. I think the live show is super important. Because touring it drives record sales. Touring drives everything. It drives everything, really. So even music supervisors, when I lived in LA and I was not a music supervisor, even, you know, we would do showcases for music supervisors. They wanted to see artists live, even though that's really not the most important thing when a music supervisor is looking for a song. So, okay, A&R involves meeting with label reps, reading the trade magazines, see what's happening, going on blogs, going to clubs, going to showcases, making contacts in different cities, finding out what's bubbling under in different regions. I used to travel all the time. I mean, you don't have to do that so much anymore because you can look on YouTube and see somebody's performance and see if you actually want to get on a plane or in a car and go meet them in person. But I used to travel all the time to meet new artists and songwriters, to try and, you know, sometimes just to see them and then to woo them. You know, it's kind of like dating. So, and networking, that's really what it's about. So you have to be able to talk to people that you don't know. It's really, really important as a publisher to be able to, you know, shoot the shit with anybody, which, you know, some people can do it naturally. It's, you know, it's learned behavior for others. Okay, so this is the most uncreative part of the creative department, but I feel like it is the most important part for the creative department. It's the most important responsibility, and that is to make sure the writer's songs are turned in properly and releases are notated. So the creative person is the first stop for the writer. They're their contact. They're the one that they have the best relationship with, hopefully. So every company I ever worked for, the writers that I worked with would come in. We would have a song submittal form, which is a split sheet, which I will share one with you. It'll be in the content area of Blackboard when it's time for me to share it with you. And it's basically a non-binding contract that just says what everybody did. You know, all the co-writers are listed, all of their publishing companies and their PROs are listed, and what the agreed upon splits are. So if this significant part of a publisher's responsibilities is not dealt with, the song cannot be registered properly with the PROs and no money can be collected. And it's a battle. You can't even work the songs because if, as a music supervisor, if somebody pitched me a song and then I went to go confirm the splits and there was some sort of split dispute and I was told that up front, I would go find another song to replace it. Now with Stepsisters, I'll bring this film up a lot because there were a lot of really weird circumstances and a lot of issues that came about, and split disputes were one of them. And the publishers were not upfront with me. Also, it took such a long time between us clearing the songs and us actually licensing the songs that the copyright ownership had changed hands. And so there were these split disputes that were kind of laid bare. Also, I was giving wrong information. And so when it came time to actually license the song, these split disputes reared their ugly heads, and it's not my responsibility as a music supervisor to work it out. It's the publisher's responsibility. So it became very problematic for me and my co-supervisor. It wasn't good. And it also made me go, you know what, I don't want to ever work with that person again, and I don't want to work with that person again. And that's how you ruin relationships. So I won't go into the dirty details of that right now. We'll discuss that when we get into sync because it's a cautionary tale. Okay, so make sure songs are turned in properly. This is a responsibility of the creative department. I know it sounds like it should be copyright, but it is not. It is the creative department, and I want you to take note of that. Okay, next is the film and TV department, and the film and TV department's responsibilities is, and sometimes actually in a really small publishing company, if you're a real mom and pop and you only have, maybe less than 10 people working for you, sometimes the creative department is the film and TV department too. They're not separated. The people who pitch for covers and sign writers are the same people who pitch songs for film and TV use. And when I say film and TV use, I mean all visual media. That's, video games, commercials, and sometimes they'll have a separate person that just does commercials and a separate person that just does video games, and then separate people that just deal with TV, and then other people that deal with film, depending on how big the company is. But their job is to pitch. There's three, it's kind of three-pronged. There's people who do creative, who pitch for film and TV. And then if you're at a bigger company, there will be somebody that all they do is clearance. So there'll be the creative person who's pitching, and you're, talking to them on a creative level, getting songs. And then once you decide on a song as a music supervisor, there'll be a clearance person who you'll clear the song with and negotiate the fee and all the terms of the deal. And then when it's time to license the song, you'll confirm with the clearance person, and that clearance person will send it off to licensing, and then somebody will generate a license. That's how it works at Warner Chappell Universal and Sony ATV. When you're at the smaller companies, a lot of the smaller, more boutique companies, the person that's doing the creative is also doing the clearance and is sometimes also doing the licensing. Sometimes the licensing will get handed off to legal. It just depends. It depends on how the company is set up. But yeah, it's three separate processes, but all of that is handled by the film and TV or the visual media department. Also, they handle commercials, which is, again, a different kind of animal. Okay, so the film and TV department on the creative side, they also have to keep up with who's looking for material. They need to get the briefs from the music supervisors and the studios, and they need to stay on top of what we call pilot season in Hollywood, when all the networks are making pilots. And so there's a transition between all the pilots that get made and the music that gets tipped into the pilots, and then the actual TV shows that get picked up. So you don't make any money by getting a song in a pilot, because the song's not actually the TV show's not actually getting released anywhere. But if you can get in a pilot, and the pilot gets picked up, then there's a really good chance that the song might stay in the pilot. So film and TV departments aggressively go after TV shows and pilots, and you have to keep track of all those people that are looking for material. And the best way to do that is to build relationships with music supervisors and the people at the studios. And film and TV people love to have mixers. They get together a lot because they're a much smaller community than the larger creative community of publishers. So music supervisors and the people that do film and TV at the publishing houses and at the labels, because the labels also have film and TV departments. They'll do a lot of mixers, they'll do showcases, things like that. They're a pretty tight community. I brought up before the IT department. So, the IT department is a department that deals with all the computers. Whenever I've started a new job anywhere, that's usually the first person I meet, because I'm technologically challenged. So I used to always, that would be my first best friend. That'd be the first person I would take to lunch, that I would be nice to, because they were the first point of contact to get me set up at the company. And these are the people that maintain the databases. They're the ones that are, responsible for us helping share information around the world. So they're a very, very vital part of any large publishing company, even the small ones. And I do know that a lot of the smaller boutique companies they farm that work out. They'll do some sort of contract deal with people who will manage their databases. Oh, and also to go back to legal, I forgot to mention that a lot of publishers, the smaller ones who can't afford to have a legal team, or maybe they can't even afford to have an attorney on staff, they will also farm that out to a law firm. So they'll have a paralegal on staff, and then they'll, when, you know, really the heavy lifting of legal comes into play, they'll turn to an attorney. So maybe they'll have a, maybe the head of the company will do the negotiating of a deal, and then the paralegal will help along, and then they'll have, you know, the attorney take the last look at the deal to make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and that there's no loopholes that were left out, and to make sure that, you know, they feel like it's a fair deal for everybody. Forgot to mention that. That's very important. Also, I've even seen at smaller companies where they'll farm out royalties. There are companies that will just do royalties. There's also clearance companies that'll just do clearance. So there's a lot of independent companies out there that will help smaller publishing companies function so that they don't have to carry a large staff, and they can go a la carte on their needs. And then last but not least, it's not really a department, but the head of the company, whether it's a CEO or a president or whoever that person who is at the top of the company, they set the tone for the company. Every publishing company I've ever walked in has a different vibe. You know, labels have different vibes, but publishing companies really do. And that tone and that vibe is set by the person at the top. You know, there's a saying, shit rolls downhill. So if you've got somebody at the top that people don't really like, or they've kind of got a, you know, they're just an asshole, or they have kind of a drippy personality, that kind of does trickle down to the rest of the staff. And so I would say, as those of you who are songwriters who might be interested in signing with a publishing company, I mean, obviously now there's so many tools out there for you. There's so many independent administrators. It's not a necessity the way it used to be if you wanted your money collected properly. But if you do get signed to one of these companies, I mean, it can really be, you know, once you get on the big wheel, and once it starts moving, it can be, you know, an amazing ride for you. You can do great things as a writer and really elevate your career. But I always recommend to writers, you want to meet the person at the top. They may not be involved in the day-to-day of what you do at that company. They're not going to be. You gotta really like the person that you're going to deal with on a day-to-day basis. But they're going to be the ones who are really in charge of what you get. Whether, like, if you need money, they're the ones who are going to approve it. If you want an advance on your royalties, they're the ones who are going to approve it. They're not necessarily the ones who are going to approve whether you get picked up for an option or not. But if, let's say, all the people below really love what you're doing and you're not recouped and they want to move forward with your deal, the person at the top can put a stop to that. So you just want to get a feel for the company and see who's in charge. You want that person at the top to know your name and know your face. So it's usually understated, but you want to know that person. So definitely make a point of getting to know the people at the company. You don't necessarily need to know the people in copyright or royalties or legal in the beginning, but you also want to make sure you know, if you've got a champion there that wants to sign you, you want to meet some of the other people in the creative department, and you want to meet whoever's the head of the creative department, and you want to meet the people in film and TV, because you want to know that if that person leaves and you're stuck at that company without them, that there's going to be other people there who will pick up the slack for you, and you have people that you like and you can work with. Okay, that's all I've got today. That's enough on the inner workings, the organization of music publishing houses. I do have a very sad slide on this that I will put in the content area. A bunch of little boxes and simplifying what I talked about today. Don't judge me on my ability to make charts because I'm not very good at it. Okay, signing off.